Welcome to lesson number 2 in the C# from start to finish course. My name is Tim Corey, and today we're going to be looking at the overview planning, the big idea or a big picture of our application, kind of laying out just the foundation of it. Really, this should be a pretty easy day, except for one thing. We've got to first review those 15 questions we asked. So we're going to simulate like I went out and talked to our stakeholders, the people that asked for the application, and said, what do you want? Here's these 15 questions I have. What are the answers? So, of course, I asked myself because I'm also the stakeholder in this demo. But let's go right into question number 1 and look at the answer. Before we get started in the lesson, I want to remind you that if you'd like to get all of these lessons right away, plus all these other bonuses, click the link below in the description to purchase this course for just $67. And while you're considering that, don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. I'd really appreciate it. Okay, so let's get back to the lesson. So the question is, how many players will a tournament handle? Is it variable? And the answer is the application should be able to handle a variable number of players in the tournament. Pretty straightforward. Basically what they're saying is, we don't know how many players will be in the tournament. Could be 2, could be 4, could be 14, 16, or whatever. Question number 2. If a tournament has less than the full complement of players, how do we handle it? So the idea here is a 14-person tournament. Well, 14 does not divide evenly. The ideal would be 16 in that case. So how do we do that? Well, a tournament with less than the perfect number should add buys in. Basically, certain people are selected at random. That's a key thing there, at random, to get to skip the first round and act as if they've won. So we'll need to figure out how to do random assignment of buys. Question number 3. Should the ordering of who plays each other be random or ordered by the input order? And the ordering of a tournament should be random. So we're not going to take in players and say if you came in first, you get the first slot. If you came in second, you get the second slot. That's not how we're going to do it. We're going to randomize once all the players are in the list. Question number 4, should we schedule the games or they play whenever? And the games should be played in whatever order and whenever the player wants to play them. So that answers that question for us. It also is going to answer one of the follow-up questions, and that is question number 5. If the games are scheduled, how does the system know when to schedule the games for? Well, we're not going to schedule it, therefore we don't care. Question number 6, but if the games are played whenever, can a game from the second round be played before the first round is complete? Nope. Each round should be fully completed before the next round is displayed. If there are 4 games in the first round, if the first 2 games are played and done, that will determine the next round's one of their games. But those 2 teams can't play each other until after the other 2 games are played in the current round. Question number 7. Does a system need to store a score of some kind or just who won? And this is a little more variable from our stakeholders. They're saying storing a simple score would be nice, just a number for each player. That way the tracker can be flexible enough to handle a checkers tournament where the winner would have a 1, as in they won, and a loser would have a 0, meaning they lost. Or a basketball tournament where the score might be 110 to 95. So question number 8, and this is a big one. What type of front end should the system have? Is it a Windows form, web page, a phone app? And the answer came back as it should be a desktop system, but here's a keyword, for now. But down the road, our stakeholders might want to turn it into an app or a website. Now, what the answer to this question really means is we have a short-term solution, which is a Windows Forms application, but we have to keep in mind the long-term possible goal of moving this to a different user interface platform. So we should be designing our application with that long-term goal in mind while still building for today. So we'll probably push a lot of our code into a DLL or some type of storage where we can disconnect the user interface easily and put a new one on. All right, let's keep going. And we're going to kind of wrap up at the end with all this information in our head. Now we can start looking at how to put it all together. So keep these key details in mind. You might even want to take notes. Question number 9. Where will a data be stored? Well, ideally, the data should be stored in Microsoft SQL database. But please put an option to store it in a text file instead. So what the stakeholder is saying here is, I would love to say we're going to have a SQL server, but there might be instances where we don't have that luxury. And so I want a fallback plan, something that's simple that we know we're going to have, which would be a text file. So we'll have to write our data access logic in such a way that it either stores to a database or to a text file. Or maybe it stores to both and we have a backup system. We'll see. Question number 10. Will this system handle entry fees, prizes, or other payouts? Now, before I go into the answer, let me talk real world, because this application, this design, this whole process, I'm trying to get as close to real world as possible. And the real world answer will probably be that first sentence. Yes. Now, as a developer, you should look at that and say, man, is that not helpful? And that's true, but sometimes you ask questions and the users just don't understand how to communicate back to you what you really need. So in this case, they see the will this system do X, and their thought is it's a yes or no question. In this case, yes. But what we're really asking is, will this system handle it, and how will it do it, or what will it do? What will it handle? Maybe a better way of saying this question would be, if this system handles entry fees, prizes, or other payouts, how will it handle it? What will it? What part of those will it handle? Some way to kind of draw out of the user more of an answer. Now, in this case, I've simulated the idea of, I went back as the developer, went back to the stakeholder and said, okay, you say yes, what does that look like? So that would be the rest of this the answer. So that answer is, the tournament should have the option of charging an entry fee. Prizes should also be an option. And that's where the administrator gets to choose how much money is awarded to a variable number of places, meaning it could be first place only, it could be first and second place, first, second, third place, and so on and so forth. The total cash amount should not exceed the income of the tournament. So if a tournament takes in $100, you can't award $1,000. And then there's also the thought of having a percentage-based system. And that's a nicety. So that would look like something like where you award the first place player 50% of the overall take. So if the tournament brings in $100, first place gets $50. But if the tournament takes in $50, the first place gets $25. That way, it's dependent on how a tournament does. Because again, remember, these tournaments, in theory, could be less than full. So in a 16-player tournament, we may only have 10 players. Which means that we have 6 people not paying. Those 6 bye weeks, or bye players. In that case, if you were basing your cash prizes on a $160 income, $10 per person, you'd only be bringing in $100, that'd be a problem. Now notice that it doesn't say we have to divide up everything to the winners. One use case for this could be where we do some kind of fundraising. Say we're going to, kind of like a 50-50 drawing. or something like that, where we're going to have this tournament. We're anticipating bringing in $200. The top prize is going to get $50. Second place is going to get $25. And the third place is also going to get $25. And then, so that's half the money. And the other half would go towards Toys for Tots or whatever. So we could do that in this existing system, or we could divide everything up, or the tournament owner, the guy that's running the tournament, could just be taking his cut. So he says, I'll give out half of the overall income of the tournament. I'll pocket the other half as my fee for running the tournament. Who knows? It's important to think through those ideas, but we don't have to go so far down the rabbit hole that our whole application changes. We should just think through, would this fit these different scenarios that are possible or probable? And if we're not sure and something will change our application, we should talk to our stakeholders. All right, question number 11. What type of reporting is needed? Well, the answer is a simple report specifying the outcome of the games per round, as well as a report that specifies who won and how much they won. I'm assuming that the how much they won and who won would be at the end of the overall tournament. These reports can be just displayed on a form, or they can be emailed to tournament competitors and the administrator. So the idea is, we don't have a full robust reporting system with PDFs and layouts and all the rest of the stuff. Instead, what we have is either we just display on a form and say, here's the daily status, or we could be emailing the competitors and the administrator these updates. You know, the round report as well as the end report of who won and how much. All right, question 12. Who can fill in the results of a game? The answer is great for us. It makes it simple. Anyone using the application should be able to fill in the game scores. That means we don't have to have this varying level of access or have this whole way of creating users to use our system and having passwords and all the rest. We just have to say, if you're using the application, you have rights to. And of course, the next question is, are there varying levels of access? And the answer would be no, because we're allowing everyone to do everything. But here's the kicker. We could say that competitors, or the administrator could say, competitors are not allowed into the application. And instead, they do everything via email. Now remember, this is a desktop application. This could reside on the administrator's desktop and not anybody else's. Which means that if they don't have access to the desktop of the administrator, they don't have access to the tournament. Which is actually kind of a two-level system. One level just gets emails. The other level is the one that has full control. So in theory, it could be, we wouldn't call it a two-level system just because we're not doing any kind of varying level of access inside the application. All right, question number 14. Should this system contact users about upcoming games? And the answer is yes. The system should email users. And that's about the third or fourth time that email has come up. We're going to have to make sure that we know how to send or at least send emails from this system. So if I were taking notes, that'd be a big one that I write down, star, underline, and put a big arrow to. Make sure you know how to do email. So the system should email users that are due to play in a round as well as who is scheduled to play. So every player who's actually playing the current round will get an email saying, you're playing game number 3. It's Tim versus Bob. And that's probably about it. Maybe some details that the administrator sets up about options or when and where, those kind of things. But this is going to be an email that goes out automatically and not manually. So we can't have we can't have specific answers to where and when, but instead we have to rely on generic options or generic text to tell them that. Finally, question 15, is each player on their own or can teams use this tournament tracker? And the answer is the tournament tracker should be able to handle the addition of other members. All members should be treated as equal in that they can all get tournament emails. Teams should also be able to name their team. So the idea here is we're not going to pick a team captain. We're not going to say that all information goes through one person. If you're on a 5-person team, all 5 people get the same email saying, here's your game for this week or this round. Also, we're going to call that team something. You really don't want to refer to a team as Tim, Bob, Sue, and Mary's team. You want to refer to it as Team Snicker Bars, whatever. That's actually probably more information than a stakeholder normally would give you, unless they're really in tune with how to give information to developers. But I simulated here the idea of maybe I went back and forth a couple times until I finally got this full answer. Again, the real world is kind of messy, and communication is a very difficult thing to do well. The key here is to learn to ask better and better questions so that users understand what you need, and also to go back and get more information and kind of really dig deep on your general question or your first question in order to get the information you really need. So those are the answers to the 15 questions that we had. So now we have the initial requirements and we have the answers to our 15 questions, which really give us more requirements. And so now we can move on to the big picture design. And the big picture design is where we look back at a high level at our application and say, okay, what should this in general look like? To use an example, if we were going to design a picture, going to draw out a picture of an ocean with a sunset over it, the big picture idea for that would be we're going to need some tan for the sand. We're going to need some blues and some greens for the ocean, the sky. We're going to need some reds for the sun and probably have some birds in there and maybe some washed up flotsam on the shore. That's a big picture look at that painting. There's a whole lot more detail that would go into it in the future. But for right now, that gives you a good rough outline of this is what we're kind of do. In the same way with our application, we're going to develop that big picture view that doesn't get really specific on anything, but it gives us those initial guardrails or boundaries for how we're going to design this application. The first broad brushstroke of our application is the structure. In our case, the structure is going to be a Windows Forms application and a class library. And I point that out whenever I build an application. I try very hard to put all my code, or at least my models, into a class library. But I want to point that out very clearly here because we have to think back and say, oh wait, the Windows Forms application should not be our complete application because we want to take that off at some point and put something different on top. If we have all of our code behind the forms, that's not going to work. Now, it's not great application design anyway, but I want to specify here just to make sure that we have that brushstroke in place. Okay, the next one is data. In that case, we're going to look at SQL and or a text file for storing information. What that data looks like or how it's being designed, or if we use one text file or 20, all those questions we're not really going to answer here. That'll be when we dive deeper later. But for now, we just know we need SQL and text file storage. Next is users. And what this represents is who's going to use our application and when. In our case, it's very, very simple. It's awesome. One at a time on one application. We're not looking to have 50 users using different applications that all point back to the same SQL database or text file. We don't have 18 different levels of security and all this authentication system going on. We just have one user at one time on one application. So that's the broad overview of our application. It seems very, very simplistic, but it's actually really important that you identify this because it puts some boundaries around you. Now, those boundaries are pretty broad. You can do a lot inside these. But what it does do is it keeps you from saying, well, maybe I should make this user interface a web application. Nope, it's a Windows Forms application. Well, maybe I should just go ahead and design an app now. Nope, Windows Form application. Well, maybe I should just store the information in memory. Nope, SQL and text file. See, all those questions that you might think down the road or might start wandering down that path, you can say, nope, these are my boundaries. And we'll make these boundaries even tighter as we go. But for right now, it's a great place for us to start before we start laying out our more detailed plan. Now, the other thing I like to do at this point is identify the big concepts in this application that I might not know everything about. So let's look at these key concepts for our application. Email. How do we email from C#? I'm going to have to figure that out at some point. So I have to keep that back in my mind. Maybe I should learn about that before I go on, or maybe I should do some research and do a trial app to make sure I understand how to do that and what the best way of doing that is. In our case, we don't have to do this kind of stuff because we're going to walk through it as we go, and I do know how to do these concepts. But again, I just want to simulate the idea of real world. In the real world, this is exactly what I do. I identify my key concepts, and I say, I need to build a small demo application to make sure I understand this, not to have the code then to plop in later, but to have the idea of how it works so that my design takes those kind of things into account. All right, so email is one. SQL. It's pretty important we know how to access our data. Next is one you might have missed, and that's custom events. And the reason I said that we need to understand custom events is because I started thinking about the application. I'm still in big picture mode here, but I'm thinking when one game is complete and it's the last game in the round, how are we going to know to check to make sure there's no more games? And how are we going to know if there are no more games to move to the next round? And how are we going to know to trigger those emails that go out saying, here is the overview of round one. Here's what happened. And that sounded an awful lot like custom events. And so I said, you know what? I think it's custom events. I'm not going to lock into that right now, but I probably should at least learn a little bit about them so that I know how to use them if I need to. The bonus here is if you learn a little bit about them and kind of brush up on them, even if you knew something about them before, but you're just kind of rusty, if you know more about them before you then go into further planning steps, you'll know if they're a good fit and you'll know kind of how they're going to fit in there in your design. And the more information you know up front, the better your application will be in the long run. The next key concept is error handling. we're going to need to take in information from the user. We really shouldn't trust the users to give us the right information all the time. So we need to have some type of error handling in place to scrub that data, to prompt them to give us better data, and to make sure that we don't have any problems as we go. So error handling is important. Interfaces is another key concept. And this is one that if you're like, what are interfaces? Don't worry, we'll get there. But I know from experience of building this type of application that it's going to be kind of important to know how to use interfaces, because we're going to use those to pass information back and forth from form to form. Also, random ordering. We've mentioned 4 or 5 times in the answers to our questions the idea of random. We have it's random who gets what in what order. It's random who gets a buy for the first week if there is one. And so this idea of random or randomizing information is going to be important. And we'll have to look at randomizing in a couple different ways. Maybe we have to figure out random numbers, or maybe it's just how you shuffle a list in a random way. And really shuffling a list is random numbers kind of stepped up a notch. So we'll need to keep that idea in our minds. And this last concept is one that really wasn't mentioned in our requirements anywhere, but it's an idea that I have for a possible add-in or a possible bonus upgrade for this software, and that's the idea of texting. We alert people via email about upcoming games and when games are done and when rounds are done and when the whole tournament is done. Maybe some users are going to want to have their notifications texted to them as well. It's not something that's going to change our application as far as structurally. Really all it is we're going to add this on top. So when we capture their first name and last name and email address in order to email them, we'll also capture their phone number. And then maybe we'll put something in place where they can have the option of getting a text as well, or we'll have some other mechanism in place to determine should we send a text. But that's really a bonus or an extra. It's not something that's really a part of our requirements. And it's okay to have these bonus ideas as long as they don't affect the overall application. If this were to change how we do things, for example, if I had to capture now a team captain instead of just capturing team members, that would be a problem because that was something specified in the requirements. So I'd need to go back to the stakeholders and say, do you want this, and this is what it will take, or this is what it will do to one of your other requirements. But if it's something that's really just an add-on or extra, that might be something you could plan to do or even do if you're pretty confident the customer or the stakeholder would want it. One area that can be important or even really helpful to you is if you are in business, especially a small business, where you're building something for someone that it's not quite as defined as maybe a big company might define an application. It's really just this loose structure like this one was. Maybe it's nice to give them a little something extra so that they see that you're not only hitting your goal for the application, which is the goal would be to meet all the requirements, but that you're going above and beyond. But the key here is to know when to do this and when not to do this. It's definitely not a good idea to do something like this if you're not going to meet your deadline. In fact, I would say do everything else first, and if you have time, make it better. And this could be one way to make it better. So that's really it. We've covered all of our questions and the answers we got back from our stakeholders. And out of that, we built one big set of requirements. And from that, we were able to develop this big picture design. We were also able to develop these key concepts that we might need to go out and research to understand better. Now, normally, if I were doing this in the workplace environment and I was unsure of something in my key concepts list, this is where I'd go out and start researching that. But again, we're simulating as though we know all of these because I'm going to teach you all of these. So therefore, we can kind of skip that step, which means that in our next lesson, we're going to cover how to design our data. We're going to map out what data we need and how it kind of groups or fits together. Make sure to check that out. Before you go, you'll see a link on the left to buy this course. Check out the intro video on this playlist for more information about what you get if you pay. Also, if you are ever wondering what you could do to help this channel out without paying money, I've listed 6 things that really help. I'd appreciate if you consider doing one or more of these. Thanks again, and don't forget to keep practicing what you learned.